Subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so that you know when live we go. Hello and welcome. In the next 40 minutes, I am going to take you through today's newspaper's most important articles for civil service examination. Articles that we will be taking up for discussion has been displayed on your screen and timestamping for the same has been provided in the description section. I hope you are aware of our GSI hybrid online course. This will help you a lot in the present lockdown to continue your learning for the civil service examination without any setback due to the lockdown. In case you are not aware of the feature of GSI hybrid online course, I would recommend you to watch this video of our illustrious web officer explaining different features of the hybrid online course of ours. The highlight of today's newspaper is the announcement of fifth tranche of measures under the economic stimulus by the Finance Minister yesterday. Finance Minister has come up with 7 measures aiming at providing employment, support to businesses, improving ease of doing business, and improving access to education and health. There are various newspaper articles today and we'll club all of them to have one combined comprehensive discussion. Let me first list down those 7 measures that were announced yesterday and then we'll pick them one by one to have a detailed discussion on each of them. Finance Minister has made announcement regarding increasing the allocation of Manrega by 40,000 crore. There also has been announcement for reform in public health sector and increased investment in public health. Announcement has also been regarding technology-driven education with equity post-COVID-19. Some reform measures have been taken concerning insolvency and bankruptcy code, and this is supposed to increase the ease of doing business. Announcement also has been regarding decriminalization of Companies Act defaults. Indian companies can now list in foreign jurisdiction directly. Finance Minister also has announced that there will be public sector enterprise policy for new self-reliant India, although the details of this policy has not been spelled out, but some reforms are expected in the public sector enterprise. Now let's take these 7 announcements one by one. The first announcement is concerning Manrega. This announcement on Manrega by Finance Minister is very welcoming and right on time. According to a UN report, Indian economy would register a growth rate of hardly 1.2%. All the forecasting agencies have downgraded the growth rate, and some economists are of the opinion that growth rate can actually be negative. The International Labour Organization in its report has highlighted that 400 million people working in the informal economy in India are at risk of falling deeper into poverty. And we all are aware of the loss of livelihood opportunities in urban areas, and labourers have to resort to forced migration back to the rural areas. In this context, we need to unleash a virtuous cycle of economic growth and employment creation, especially in rural areas. There has to be some avenues to provide employment opportunities to people. This will put money in the hands of people, increasing the income levels. That in turn will boost the demand. Higher demand will incentivize higher production, ultimately accelerating the GDP growth. Even before COVID-19, the data shows there were reduction in demand, and reduction in growth rate was an account of reduced demand. So there is not much of constraint from the supply side. It is the demand that was constrained even before COVID-19. So it is extremely urgent to increase the demand in the economy. And in this regard, the Finance Minister has announced for additional amount of rupees 40,000 crore for Manrega. This is over and above rupees 61,500 crore that was announced in the last budget. The last budget actually slashed down the Manrega allocation by rupees 9,500 crore. The budget of 2019 allocated 71,000 crore, but the budget in 2020 allocated 61,500 crore. So the budgetary allocation reduced by 9,500 crore. And this was done despite the unemployment figures shooting to 45 years high to 6.1% in 2017-18. And this step by the government was severely criticized back then. But that has been corrected now. An additional rupees 40,000 crore has been allocated for Manrega. Although this is a very welcoming step, but what also needs adequate attention is the proper implementation of the program, the timely payment of the wages, the grievance redressal system which is absent presently regarding wages, etc., that needs to be set in, and attention has to be given to create durable assets, following the Tamil Nadu model in this regard. See, Manrega I feel is important for this year's mains exam, if mains exam happens this year. And I have discussed this topic in detail in the DNS dated 14th April 2020. I have discussed all the major aspects of Manrega that are relevant for the mains examination. I would suggest you again to add this topic to the list of your hot topics and cover it thoroughly for the coming mains examination. The second announcement was concerning health reforms and health-related initiatives. COVID-19 pandemic has really exposed the weakness in our health infrastructure and our health ecosystem. The low expenditure of government on health has been re-highlighted. It is only just 1.5% of the GDP. You must be knowing that National Health Policy 2017 mandates the government expenditure to increase to 2.5% by end of 2025. We were unable to set up hospitals dedicated to deal with COVID-19 pandemic, as China was able to do. There has been absence of dedicated labs for testing at block level and in rural areas, and we are still struggling to get the testing kits. Only few weeks back, indigenous testing kits were produced. And the private labs prefer to be shut down rather than helping citizens in the time of crisis. The announcement made by the Finance Minister touches on the systemic weakness of our health ecosystem. The Finance Minister has said that public expenditure on health will be increased. The problem is A, she has not given the number and the timeline, and B, this announcement already has been done before, as we have talked about that National Health Policy 2017 has announced or mandated that the health expenditure of government should increase to 2.5% by 2025. And the Finance Minister then has announced revamping of health and wellness centers in rural and urban areas. But revamping of health and wellness centers already have been announced by Ayushman Bharat scheme. Ayushman Bharat scheme has talked about converting the existing 1.5 lakh sub-health centers and primary health centers into health and wellness centers, and the design and functioning of health and wellness centers have been described under Ayushman Bharat scheme. Now, how exactly the further revamping will happen, that is not clear yet. But Finance Minister had made some very important announcement with regard to health. She has announced setting up of infectious disease hospital blocks in all districts to deal with COVID-19 like pandemic in future. She has also announced integration of public health labs. Presently, there is no digital integration of public health labs. This will help in surveillance and management of pandemic like COVID-19. Then there is also one very important announcement regarding National Institutional Platform. This platform will be under ICMR, and the purpose of the platform will be to connect all the research institutions working on infectious diseases. The most important announcement with regard to health was on National Digital Health Mission. See, National Health Policy 2017 emphasized that if the aim of citizen-centric health infrastructure, quality of care, better access, inclusivity, and universal health coverage aims like this, if that has to be achieved, then we have to bring in the power of digital technologies and integrate that in our health infrastructure. And in order to give shape to such an idea, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare appointed a committee under leadership of Satya Narayan to create a framework for leveraging digital technology in the field of health. The committee recommended a national digital health blueprint for creation of national digital health ecosystem. The committee also actually gave this idea of coming up with a national digital health mission. So now the government has accepted the recommendation of this committee. An announcement has been made that National Digital Health Mission will be started very soon. This in itself is a lengthy subject. The recommendation of the committee runs into hundreds of pages. But since the announcement of this mission has been made, and news will start to come in few days. So in the coming DNS, maybe the detail of National Digital Health Mission will be covered. So we are not discussing this mission and the recommendation of Satyanarayan Committee in itself, but we are just noting it down that National Digital Health Mission is going to come. If you look at the announcements concerning health, some of the steps are very welcoming, such as National Digital Health Missions, setting up of district level infectious diseases hospitals, also networking of the public labs. These steps will be crucial in dealing with future pandemics. However, these initiatives will not be successful unless three things are done. Number one, central government increases its health expenditure. Number two, private sectors are taken on board. Because health infrastructure, testing laboratories cannot be set up deep into the rural areas at block level unless private sector participate, and some attractive incentive has to be developed for private sector participation. Number three, health is a state subject, and without the cooperation of a state, drastic changes in health administration cannot be brought about. So, states must take the responsibility and initiative in changing the health ecosystem in cooperation with the center. The third announcement was related to technology driven education with equity post COVID 19. Due to COVID 19, schools and universities are shut down and Zoom app is flourishing. Many schools and universities are carrying out classes using the Zoom app. But however, Government of India also has taken many initiatives in the past which is now reaping the benefit. For example, the digital platforms like SWAM and the DTH channels of SWAM Prabha. Classes are available on these channels to students from class 9th to class 12th. Finance Minister has announced a new initiative called as Pradhan Mantri E-Vidya program. Some of the initiatives under this program are already running and some new initiative has been announced. For instance, the announcement of Diksha for school education. This is a platform for repository of materials for teachers training and sharing of their experiences. So this is something which is already up and running. Similarly, announcement like one earmark TV channel, which is again part of Swayamprabha, but this has been expanded from class 1 to class 12. Presently, it is from class 9th to class 12th. And there has been announcement for e-content for visually and hearing impaired, which already has been running under various programs. But a new announcement is that top 100 universities will be permitted to automatically start online courses. Mano Darpan, an initiative for psychological support to students, teachers, and families for mental health and emotional well-being, will be launched immediately. So maybe tomorrow or day after, you will get to read about this scheme in the newspaper. National Foundational Literacy and Numeracy Mission for ensuring that every child attains learning levels and outcomes in grade 5 by 2025 will be launched in December 2020. So these three are the new initiatives announced by Government of India, and this is the expansion of a running initiative regarding technology driven education. See, the announcement regarding technology driven education is really welcoming, and the implementation, if done properly, will really revolutionize India's education system. But care has to be taken that technology should not become the source of inequality, because in the announcement it has been emphasized that education should come with equity. So it must be taken care that the digital divide existing in the country be narrowed down so that everyone can reap the benefit of technology driven education. In this regard, you must have some data of digital divide or disparity in internet use. For instance, according to India Internet Report 2019, only 36% of India's population have access to internet. Digital India program must be used to bridge this digital divide to ensure equitable and inclusive outcome of digital learning. The fourth announcement is concerning changes that have been made to insolvency and bankruptcy code. Due to COVID-19 pandemic, the MSMEs are in stress. Due to lockdown and disruption in supply chain, they are not able to perform their businesses. And there is a serious concern that they will default on the loan repayment. and they will fall under the resolution process provided under the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. You know what happens under IBC? Under IBC, if a corporate entity is not able to repay its loan to the banks, then the banks can approach NCLT, National Company Law Tribunal. NCLT will then initiate the judicial process of winding up of the company, and the banks can take over that corporate entity. Insolvency and bankruptcy proceedings will threaten the survival of MSME. In this regard, three announcements has been made. First is to increase the threshold for invoking IBC for a corporate from rupees 1 lakh to rupees 1 crore. This of course will give relief to many MSMEs, but the only problem here is that this has been already put to force in March 2020 itself. So as such, this is not new announcement. This is something which is already there. But however, there is something new as well. Finance Minister has announced that special insolvency resolution framework for MSME. This will be announced soon. Section 240A of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code empowers central government to come up with special insolvency resolution for MSMEs. Government will come up with a special insolvency resolution, and this is something that you have to look for in the coming days' news. The third announcement is there will be halt on IBC proceedings. So for 1 year, depending upon the pandemic situation, there will be no fresh initiation of insolvency proceedings. So there are three things here. Number one, the threshold for invoking IBC increased from rupees 1 lakh to rupees 1 crore. Number two, special insolvency resolutions for MSME. And number three, for 1 year, there will be complete halt on IBC proceedings. The fifth announcement is to decriminalize certain defaults under Companies Act to basically improve the ease of doing business. The provisions of Companies Act 2013 are very stringent, and even minor offences are considered as criminal offence. In this regard, a company law committee was appointed by Ministry of Corporate Affairs, and the committee gave many recommendations. The government was planning to bring amendment to Companies Act 2013 by introducing Companies Amendment Bill 2020. The aim was to decriminalize certain minor procedural and technical errors, which may be inadvertently committed under Companies Act 2013. But however, the bill was not taken up for discussion in the Parliament due to COVID-19 pandemic, and the government would go for ordinance route in order to give effect to the amendment to the Companies Act. You may think for a moment that Parliament can be convened digitally, as the Parliament of 23 nations are working, and the bill could have been passed by the digital Parliament. But that is a separate issue. Nevertheless, the government has decided to take up the ordinance route, and the news concerning this will come up when the ordinance will be promulgated. And then we can cover in the DNS the detail of the provisions of the bill. Finance Minister also has announced that the Indian companies will be allowed to do direct listing in foreign stock exchanges. Presently, the mechanism you understand, Indian companies cannot access the equity market of the foreign nations freely. Although the bond market of the foreign nation can be freely accessed through the instruments like masala bond, but the shares of the companies registered in India cannot be issued directly in the foreign nation. For that, a special mechanism is required that needs the generation of American depository receipt if the shares are issued in the United States, or global depository receipt if the shares are issued in the European Union or other nation. Suppose there is a company C registered in India, and this company wants to issue shares in the foreign nation to raise some fund. What C has to do is to deposit its shares to a domestic custodian bank. The domestic custodian bank will pass on the receipt to a foreign depository bank. Foreign depository bank will get to know that certain amount of shares has been locked with domestic custodian bank. Then the foreign depository bank will issue certain receipts, and they are called as American depository receipt if the concerned nation is United States. And then the foreign entities in US can actually trade using American depository receipt. Generally, certain amount of shares of Indian company are clubbed together to produce one American depository receipt. In general, 10 shares of Indian company are equivalent to one American depository receipt. And then American depository receipt are traded just like the shares. But you see, there are two institutions in between the seller and the buyer. And these two institutions ensures that the default by the companies does not happen. Think of it in a reverse way. If a company registered in US wants to raise fund from India by issuing shares, then the same reverse process has to happen. The company has to sell certain amount of shares to the foreign bank. The foreign bank will pass on the information to one of the Indian bank. The Indian bank will release the receipt, and that receipt will be called as Indian depository receipt. And then Indian depository receipt can be traded just like shares, and that will protect the Indian investors. But in 2018, a committee was appointed by SEBI, and that committee recommended that Indian companies should be allowed to list their securities directly in the stock markets of other countries. It was announced by the Finance Ministry that the government will come up with necessary regulatory framework to enable Indian companies to list their securities directly on the stock market in other countries. And this is supposed to enable the Indian companies to access the foreign equity market with more ease. What regulatory framework will be put in place? This is something that we will come to know eventually. Finance Minister also had made some announcements regarding public sector enterprise. She has said that government will announce public sector enterprise policy. She also has said that all the sectors would be opened up for private sector. It's not very clear what she means by this because all the sectors are already open for private sector except railway operations and nuclear energy. Nuclear energy in all likelihood will remain under public sector, and railway operation in foreseen future will also remain under public sector. So what else is there to open up for private sector? We don't know. Or maybe she meant that the FDI limit will be increased in private sector. It's not wise to speculate on this, but hopefully the finance ministry will clarify on this point. The minister has also announced that a list of strategic sectors will be notified, and at least one public sector enterprise will be functioning in each strategic sectors, but the number will be kept 1 to 4. And if there are more enterprises in that particular sector, then they will be privatized or they will be merged or they will be brought under holding companies. She also has said that in non-strategic sector, and this is very important, public sector enterprise will be privatized. And maybe this public sector enterprise policy will be put in place to guide the process of privatization. But we know not yet the details of this policy, but tentatively privatization will be one important aspect of this policy, and maybe for resource mobilization it's privatization of some public enterprises that government is staring at. There is one more very important announcement made by the finance minister which I didn't mention in the beginning, but nevertheless this is crucial because the state finance is in perils. Sale of petroleum and petroleum product, which is the source of half of the revenue generation for the state, is almost nil because of the lockdown. Registration of property is nil. Center has not disbursed the GST compensation of last 3-4 months. This has put the state finance to unsustainably high level of stress. In this regard, the finance minister has announced some respite. See, both the center from Article 292 and the states from Article 293 have the borrowing power. But the center and the states, they are not put on equal footing with respect to the power of borrowing. The central government has unrestricted power of borrowing in India and from abroad, subject only to limitations imposed by the parliament by law. But on the other hand, the borrowing powers of the states are limited. They have the power to raise loan only within India. They are not allowed to raise loan outside India. And within India, a state may raise loan from the government of India or float public loans. But public loans cannot be floated without the consent of government of India. If there is still a loan on the state government to be paid back to the union government. And generally, there are some loans which the state government have to pay back. And in that case, for every public loan that the state government wants to raise, needs permission from the central government. And the permission is granted by the central government to the state government to raise public loan only if such a loan will not exceed the fiscal deficit of the state by 3% of state GDP. This number is actually suggested by Finance Commission and that is accepted by Government of India. But this is an extraordinary situation, and hence the central government has decided to exceed the borrowing limit of the states from 3% to 5%. This will give states some extra resources of rupees 4.28 lakh crores. However, this won't come for free. This permission of increased borrowing limit is only conditional, and the condition is that the state government are required to bring in some reforms. For example, universalization of one nation, one ration card. This was in pipeline and was about to be finished in a month or two, but was roadblocked by COVID-19 pandemic. So this reform has to be taken by the state government. Apart from that, some reforms related to ease of doing business, reform in power distribution, and improvement in urban local body revenues. Now, detail of this as to what exact target is in urban local body revenues or ease of doing business, that has not been spelled out. Perhaps the conditions imposed will be made more clear in the coming days, but you have to keep in mind that this is a conditional permission. And with this, we have completed the 8 announcement that was made by the finance minister yesterday. You have to make a notes of it because there are too much information. If you see the announcement made in all the 5 trenches, it is too huge of an information. So you have to make a notes, you have to revise, you have to re-revise, then you have to revise for the 3rd time and the 4th time. And after that, you have to practice questions for the prelims and for the mains. Only then it will go in your long-term memory. There is a news on page number 4, and this is an important one. When you're opening up the dimensions of COVID-19 pandemic's effect as per the syllabus, for instance, on society, on polity, on international relation, on economy, on environment, you must also open up a dimension of technology adoption. And in that regard, this news is important. The news is titled, Punjab farmers to go for direct seeding of rice. Farmers in rice growing belts, especially in Punjab, are shifting from conventional puddled transplanted rice method to direct seeding of rice. Because of the obvious shortage of the labours this Kharif season, the migrant labours have migrated back to their hometowns, and in the rice growing states like Punjab, there is acute shortage of labour. We will understand what is this conventional puddled transplanted rice, and we will also understand how DSR can overcome the problem of labour shortage and can also be advantageous over the conventional puddled transplanted rice method. The traditional practice of rice cultivation can be broadly divided into 3 stages. At stage number 1, rice saplings are grown in the nursery. Nursery has artificial monsoon-like condition. The nursery is inundated with water, which creates a similar condition which is there on the field on the onset of monsoon. At stage number 2, these rice saplings are rooted out from the nursery and they are packed to be carried to the field where they will be replanted, and that is why this process is called as transplantation. In the meanwhile, before stage number 3, the field is prepared for the transplantation of the rice saplings, and at this stage the field is puddled, meaning the weeding is done and then the field is inundated with water and the tractor is used to create muddy condition in the field, and in that muddy condition the sapling of the rice are transplanted. You would immediately gauge that this process is time taking and this process is labor intensive. So the entire process cannot be carried out if there is labor shortage. We will come to it in a while as to how to overcome the problem of labor shortage, but it will be worthwhile to understand why such a tedious process is adopted for rice cultivation. See, at stage number 1, inundation of a small area is done. This is easy to do because water requirement to inundate this small nursery will be less. and we are creating a monsoon-like condition before the arrival of monsoon. So technically, we are starting the production of rice before the monsoon has arrived. So this is basically to accelerate the process, to begin the process before the time of cultivation has arrived, that is before the monsoon actually have arrived. There will be added advantage to this process. For instance, only those seed will actually go to the field which has germinated. Ideally, all the seeds will not germinate. But we are not putting the seed in the main field, rather we are putting the sapling. So there is no question of certain seeds not getting germinated in the actual field. So the plant's per unit area will be very high, or the maximum in this case. If you do it any other way, if sowing is done directly on the fields, then there are some seeds which are bound to not germinate, and that will cause the plant's per unit area to be less than this process. But the biggest advantage of this process lies in higher yield. What happens is paddy plants shoot out as single branch. But when the plant is disturbed at the early stage, either by crushing them in a controlled way or by transplanting them, when the plant is transplanted, then there is a stress on the roots. And when there is a stress on the plant, they shoot out and multiple branches are produced. And this naturally increases the growth. But obviously, there will be some disadvantages as well. As we have pointed it out already, it is labor intensive, it is time consuming, and when you are doing this process of transplantation, when you are rooting out the rice saplings from here, which you will be finally putting up in the field, that creates some stress in the roots. Although that stress is helpful in branching out the shoot, but that stress takes time to overcome, and certain part of the roots have to be regrown. So that increases the time of maturity of the plant. And secondly, as you can see from this picture, a lot of hard work goes in puddling the field, because sapling will not survive if you don't puddle the field. If you don't make the field muddy, then the saplings won't survive. That is extremely important that you do this. And when you do puddling, then you destroy the texture of the soil. The crop of the next season, the rabi crop, will be suffering because of this puddling of the field. Now we will talk about direct seeding of rice technique and advantages it can have over traditional rice cultivation system. Direct seeding of rice is really what the name suggests. It is direct sowing of the rice into the field through mechanized process. There is a machine having outlet pipes shown like this, and there are hoopers at the top. These hoopers, they are filled with the rice seeds, and these seeds are dropped through the pipes into these outlets. The rate at which the seeds are dropped can be controlled, and the distance between these two outlet pipes can also be controlled. So the distance between two rice saplings and the distance between the two rows of rice sapling can be controlled. Let us see one by one how the DSR technique can match up with the advantages of conventional technique that we have seen earlier, and what more advantages it can give. First of all, we saw that the plant's per unit area in conventional technique is highest because the seeds are not sown, it's the sapling. So there is no question of seed not germinating in the field. But in the DSR technique, as we have just seen, the seeds will be sown directly in the field. So there will be some seeds which will not be germinating. So that will decrease the plant density in the field. But however, since the DSR technique involves mechanization, there is high precision and high accuracy in operation. So the depth of the seeds and distance between the two rows are kept constant. When this uniformity is maintained, then there is greater growth of the crop. So although there are chances of certain seeds not germinating, but still DSR techniques catch up with the advantage that the conventional technique offers. We also saw that the seeds can be sown much before the monsoon, and this was done basically to start working ahead of time, so there is enough time for the farmer after the harvesting season to prepare the field for the next crop. But all these process of growing the rice sapling in the nursery and do the transplantation again in the main field, that is not done because seeds are sown directly on the field. And the time that you were trying to save by doing all this process will still be saved, because the process of sowing is very fast as it is done through the machines, and if you look at from one point of view, then it is also advantageous as less labor will be required in the process of cultivation. Then we saw that the puddling of the field is done, and during the process of puddling, the weeds are removed from the field and the field is covered with water. Watering the field helps in survival of sapling, but it also helps in not allowing the weeds to regrow. In DSR technique, no puddling is done. The field is not made muddy, but weeding of the field is done, and it saves lots of water that is involved in the process of puddling. And as we have seen before, this is more organized and uniform way of dispersal of seed into the field. So irrigation water can also be saved, as micro irrigation can be effectively deployed in the field because the distance between the two crop sapling and the distance between the two row of the crops, they are constant. So micro irrigation infrastructure can be designed to match these parameters easily. Further, there is also reduced incidence of nutrient deficiency because field is not flooded with water. And since the machines gets into the soil some inches deep, so it also becomes an avenue for groundwater recharge. Then we saw that the most important advantage of conventional technique is multiple branches coming out of the shoot. And this naturally increases the productivity. This happens because of the stress that the plant has to undergo during the process of transplantation. But there will be no transplantation in DSR technique. So there will be no such stress. So there will be no branching out. So the productivity ought to be reduced. But that can be covered up by other techniques and other cultivation practices involved in the DSR. For instance, choosing the proper time of sowing. Timing is everything in rice cultivation. The timing of sowing is extremely important. The timing of flooding the field with water is also extremely important. That is why if the monsoon gets delayed, then the rice cultivation gets severely affected. And since very less time will be required through mechanized sowing, you can precisely time your sowing process. So some advantage you will get from there. Then optimal seed rate, proper weeding of the field, and water management can be done better in case of DSR. With these measures, the natural disadvantage with regard to productivity can be covered up. And there is one more advantage of DSR technique, as we have talked about, that there is root shock during the process of transplantation. Some parts of the roots are harmed when the rice sapling are pulled out from the soil in the nursery, and then when they are put back into the field, it takes some time for certain parts of the roots to regrow. And that add up to the total time of maturation of the plant, that is around 7 to 10 days. So these 7 to 10 days are saved in the process of direct seeding of rice technique. So it will give more time for the management of paddy straw and timely sowing of the next wheat crop. However, the DSR technique will not come without any disadvantage. You can think of various disadvantages from various dimensions and point that out in the comment section. There are two news concerning Afghanistan on page number 6 and on page number 10. This news on page number 6 basically urges India to get engaged with Taliban. The strategy of India so far has been to develop social capital in Afghanistan. India has engaged culturally with Afghanistan. India has engaged through economic investment that is aimed at shared prosperity. But the engagement so far has not touched Taliban. India has never been ready to recognize Taliban and engage with it. But every other nation is recognizing Taliban as a political force within Afghanistan and engaging with it, be it United States or Russia or China or Pakistan or Iran. So the article is basically arguing that India should also engage with Taliban because Taliban is a reality in Afghanistan, and sooner than later it will become a political force also. Although it is already a political force, it already have its administrative structure and it controls 50 to 55% of Afghanistan. This second article is an interview of Indian ambassador, and he says that Taliban basically is a guerrilla kind of force and there is no point engaging with it until it forms a democratically elected government. So the strategy so far that India has adopted in engagement with Afghanistan is totally correct. There is no drawback in that. But now when the Taliban seems to become an informidable force, India should start engaging with it, but on condition that Taliban itself joins the intra-Afghan talks. The issue of Afghanistan has been covered in detail in many of the DNS. And the notes regarding these two articles I have added in the PDF also. Will it be a high hope if I expect you to go through the PDF and absorb what has been given in these two articles. We have come to the end of the discussion and now we will take question for the day. Answer to yesterday's question of the day is option C. United States and Canada are not the free trade partners of ASEAN. Basically, the countries that were to comprise RCEP, they are the free trade partners of ASEAN. That will include Japan, South Korea, China, India, New Zealand, and Australia. Question for the day for today is which of the following is our advantages of direct seeding of rice technique? Higher accuracy and precision in operations, more nutritious rice, much higher productivity compared to traditional rice cultivation. One only, one and two only, one and three only, all of the above. We have come to the end of the session for today. Don't forget to solve the questions on the DNS quiz. Goodbye, take care.